Chapter 12. Uncovering Our Stories and Assumptions. It's one thing to define and illustrate attachments in general, but it's quite another to recognize attachments in ourselves. This can be achieved by examining our beliefs and the effects on our personal dream. There is a difference between learning from our own experiences in life and learning from what others tell us their experiences have been. Just like teachings of my family, I didn't understand until I was able to see a concept or trait in myself. It is my intention that this next section will help guide you on your personal journey of self-exploration. Exercise. Uncovering your assumptions. Begin drawing a circle on a piece of paper until you are about 3/4 done. Then stop. Even though you have not completed it, you can still recognize the shape as a circle. This is because the mind has the ability to make the assumption that what we're looking at a circle and will complete it for us. The same is true if we draw two sides of a triangle. We see it as a triangle. Based on our past experiences, our mind has the uncanny ability to fill in the missing parts when the information is not available. This is the Gestalt principle of closure. Our minds react to familiar patterns even though we have received incomplete information. Artists use this method when creating conceptual art, which is quite often thought-provoking and mind-boggling. But the mind doesn't just do this with geometrical shapes. It fills in gaps to make assumptions about everything. The mind shows preferences when adding information too, and favors adding what it thinks it already knows. That is, it supplements incomplete new information with the beliefs it already is attached to. As an example, let's pretend I am a man who is brokenhearted over my last relationship in which my girlfriend left me for another guy. I have a new girlfriend who I've been dating for a few months, and I am waiting on her phone call. As the time passes, I wonder, why hasn't she called? It's 7 p.m. She should be finished with work by now. And then my mind attempts to answer my question. Here are some possibilities that my mind comes up with based on my past experiences to complete the triangle. A. She is out with her girlfriends. B. She's at the gym working out. Or C. She is with another man. Although I didn't have all the information, my mind came up with 3 possibilities. If I am unaware of my attachment to my past that I label as knowledge, I will gravitate to the story that best fits my narrative. She is out with another man. Coming from a place of unawareness, my emotional reaction is to grab a hold of that last assumption and think back to a time when she wasn't available for me. As I do so, my anger and my attachment grow, and my mind reinforces my insecurity with even more assumptions. Of course, that explains everything, I think. At that moment, the door opens, and in walks my girlfriend, with shopping bags full of food and goodies. "Surprise!" she says. I turned around in anger and shout, "You're cheating on me!" Bang. Fight. Because I was still stuck on my last failed relationship, my insecurity was dominant, and the assumption that my new girlfriend had also cheated on me best fit my story. Coming from a healthier place, I could have attached myself to one of the other assumptions, or no assumption at all. But my attention went from the information that fed my insecurity because it was most familiar to me at this time. This is the problem with making assumptions. To make matters worse, we're not only predisposed to assume things, we also become attached to our assumptions and convince ourselves of their truth. This completes the missing line in the story that we could grasp the whole truth by shining light, or what we think we know based on previous knowledge, into darkness of the unknown. But it is a line of information that is not based in truth. It is a line that satisfies an internal need for resolution. We are willing to even distort this line so that it fits what we believe it should based on prior experiences. If the actions we take in life are based on information we perceive, not having the information can stop us in our tracks. Not having all the information can stop us in our tracks. Our sense of security is often dependent on knowing the big picture and taking the right actions. Although we can not possibly know everything, from that point of view, there is a need for assumption to reinforce our sense of security. The more we attach to a belief that offers us some sense of security, the more attached we are to the correctness of that assumption. We are only one point of perception and cannot possibly be aware of everything. Therefore, one action experienced by many will have many stories to explain and justify it. Each person fills their own version of the story with familiar lines of what they assume to be true based on their attachments. We are attached to creating a story about every action from our own point of view, describing, explaining, and fitting it into our own belief system. This is what we have been taught to do. Let's say I stand up from where I am sitting, walk across the room, kiss your hand. The kiss is truth. The missing information is, why did I do that? What does this action represent? What does it mean? The answer to these questions are subjective and are all based on what we already know and are all the possibilities that are available within our belief system. Only I know for certain why I have kissed your hand. When we don't have all the information, often the first story we tell ourselves is the closest to the truth. You might say, Miguel kissed my hand to prove a point. But as we tell and retell the story about the event, we add on to the story, often coming up with less desirable possibilities, like for example, about my girlfriend not calling. Someone with distorted perception might end up convincing herself that I kissed her hand out of pity because she is getting old. Believing an assumption is a choice. Though if I am unaware of my mind is filling in gaps, then it is not really a choice at all. I am at the mercy of my assumptions. But when I have that awareness, an assumption allows me to consider a possibility that will only become true the moment, and only at that moment, when it comes to fruition. If an assumption is incorrect, with awareness I am able to simply release it. New possibilities abound. Seeing our attachments for what they are allow us to see that an assumption is merely one possibility. When we are aware that our assumptions are not necessarily truth, but simply possibilities, little discipline is required not to act on them. We already know that an assumption is a story we have created that shows a possibility, and if life presents a different truth, then we detach from that possibility because it no longer serves us. Exercise. Discovering the foundation of your beliefs through assumptions. Here is a little exercise for you. Tap into your memory and recall those experiences by which you made assumptions that were later shown to be untrue. Why did you make the assumption you made? Identify the missing pieces of information and think about why you choose to fill in the gaps the way you did at the time. In almost every case, the stories we create will be based on your attachments to certain belief structures, and if you leave the source of these attachments uninvestigated, they will assuredly cause you future suffering. For example, in the earlier fictitious examples of my girlfriend surprising me with dinner, I had assumed she was late because she was cheating on me. If this assumption goes unchecked, the wound of her imagined betrayal would negatively impact my emotional sense of self, and it reinforces my faulty beliefs about relationships just as it had been true. In other words, a wound that we create by an assumption will have a lasting impact on an attachment until the moment I see the fallacy of my assumption. That was good. I'm going to read that sentence again. In other words, a wound that was created by an assumption will have a lasting impact as an attachment until the moment I see the fallacy of my assumption. But you can't stop with just recognizing the assumption. The purpose of this exercise is to become aware of the foundation of your beliefs, especially the ones that have a negative impact on your life. When we build our belief structure on assumptions and we become attached to that structure, we are living in ignorance. The truth, however, is the path to freedom. Becoming aware of those assumptions and the source of our attachment to them allows us the opportunity to truly heal from a wound. The quest for truth versus the quest for being right. When you become aware of how attachments distort and corrupt knowledge, you can begin to see how some people easily confuse the quest for truth for the quest for being right. These are not the same thing. The quest to be right is about self-importance. We need to be right in order to accept ourselves. This is a condition we place on ourselves for self-acceptance and the acceptance of others. The quest for truth, on the other hand, is the desire to discover. regardless of what our beliefs are, regardless of whether our beliefs are supported in this process. Making a choice to accept or reject our beliefs. My grandmother, Madre Sarita, was a faith healer. People who witnessed her actions would create fantastical stories about them, attributing magical qualities to her abilities to help others achieve better health. They called themselves believers. Every time she healed someone, an observer would analyze and describe her actions, making it all sound so phenomenal and otherworldly. My grandmother would always say, "God healed this person, not me." Yet others would still put their own spin on it and spread their belief to others. Since these fantastic stories were about my grandmother, I really wanted to believe in them. I had witnessed many of the same events, and I saw many people truly recover from their ailments. But I began to notice that other people's perceptions of what had happened didn't necessarily fit mine. While I felt an experience, other people tried to explain it to me by calling it magic. Somewhere between the lines was the truth. But all the superlatives kept it hidden. This made it mystical and fueled fanaticism to those people who were firmly attached to such a belief. So at a young age, I had to learn to decipher what was truth and what was just a story. I learned to rely on my own perceptions, but to question my own perceptions as well. If I had tried to tell someone who insisted Madre Sarita had performed magic that they were misperceiving something about the action, they would not have believed me. After all, they were speaking of something they had personally witnessed and benefited from: magic. The believers would dismiss anyone who disagreed with them and not be able to understand. So I learned to let it go. As I became aware of my attachment to being right, my need to convince them to see from my point of view was reflected back on me. Later, I thought I could depend on things I learned in school to be true. After all, what I had learned was drawn from common sense and history. Then one day my father told me not to believe everything I was learning in school. In much of the same way people had interpreted Madre Sarita's actions, people had interpreted the stories and ideas I was being taught. That news really threw me for a loop. But I came to understand that I had to look for the truth in all cases. In Mexico, I spent much of my childhood. There is a story that schools teach about six heroic cadets who defended themselves in the war against the United States. At the Battle of Calpepec, in the United States Army came into Mexico City from the west and tried to take over the palace. 6 cadets remained, and they defended the place and the city, but they fell one by one. Juan Escuta, the last of Los Niños heroes, refused to be taken by the enemy. He wrapped himself in the Mexican flag and threw himself from the palace point. When you go to Chapala Castle, you could see the area where he supposedly landed, and then look to the stone marking the point from where he supposedly jumped. It seems impossible for him to accomplish this feat. Modern historians refute this patriotic myth, and some say the cadets never existed at all, despite genealogical evidence. Fact or fiction, it is taught in our history textbooks. Mexico is not the only country or culture whose textbooks contain stories rather than facts. As a child, I believed the story of Los Niños heroes because I didn't know better. Now I have the choice to believe it or not. I know that within the words, a feeling of patriotism can be found. That is truth, even if the story is false. I choose to believe I'm a Toltec, a descendant of the Eagle Knights, because I choose to believe the words of my great-great-grandfather, Don Ezekiel, who passed away when he was 116 years old. He was already an elder when my grandmother was born in 1910. His words stand. This belief is a leap of faith. My family may pass on the teachings of Eagle Knights, but we are truly descendants, as our oral tradition tells us. Knowing that our history is based on word in no way negates it. I also have to be honest in understanding that the stories we tell now contain generous amounts of distortion and adaptations. Still, the lessons remain the same, and so I choose to believe in the lessons. This is my preference. The stories that we tell ourselves to make us feel comfortable and safe are simply history. We can choose to believe because we want to, keeping in mind that the stories do not describe the truth of who we really are, and we must be careful, as the very act of wanting to believe in those stories blinds us to the truth. Believing the stories without question or scrutiny ultimately leads to disillusionment, as we become attached to the identity we have created for ourselves through the telling of the story. Remember, a story can describe a moment, an experience, a life lesson, but regardless of how clean the reflection is, regardless of how clean a reflection of the truth it may be, it is still a story that we can choose to believe or not. Things in our world go beyond reason and logic. But to believe in the mystical or in the scientific without being skeptical is letting knowledge take control. The fantasy then becomes more real than life itself, to the point where we spend much time looking for the spectacular, that we just don't realize joy can be found in the everyday occurrences happening all around us. When we base our identity and self-importance on what we believe, regardless of whether it is earthly or supernatural realm, we find it difficult to be skeptical. And when we question everything we believe in, the foundation on which we have built our identity will prove to be shaky. But remember, self-confidence is being able and willing to question your own beliefs. Many people believe that self-confidence means standing behind your own beliefs 100%. If you fail to listen to what else is going on in the world and you only rely on what you think, you know, and you believe, you've attached yourself to an idea that blinds. This is not confidence, it is stubbornness. We are conditioned to behave in such a way that whenever we encounter the truth that contradicts something we believe, we are quick to either reject it or create a story that protects our belief and further weaves a web of distortion. In so doing, we keep distorting our faith further, forming new beliefs to keep our sense of self safe. The lesson here is to shift our confidence from our own beliefs and back to ourselves, since we are the living beings who give life to the beliefs in the first place. In other words, rather than having confidence in what we know, we have confidence in who we are. Instead of defending or debating beliefs with all of our might, we look and we listen and see what is going on around us. Questioning ourselves and being open to changing our minds about something does not mean that we must question our core being. With self-confidence, we can simply question our beliefs and the stories we've created to describe our being. Ask yourself, where did I learn that belief? How is this belief affecting me? Am I using that belief well? Do I still need that belief? These questions can help you identify the things that inhibit your full potential. Consider a particular issue, action, or relationship. Are your past beliefs regarding this topic still true in the present? We often fear that changing our point of view is admitting that something about us is wrong. Thinking that we have been wrong can lead to guilt, because actions we've taken and things we've said had been based on that one belief. If we decide that a belief is no longer working for us, it can potentially make us question every past action that was based on that belief. It does not have to be this way. Instead, we can choose to be aware that what works one day might not work the next. This change, and we do not need to go back to each other, back over each and every action. This change, and we do not need to go back over each and every action. Our virtue has not been lost. Things change, and we do not need to go back and over each and every action. Our virtue has not been lost. Remember to proceed with self-love and self-acceptance at all times, as this is the only path to real and lasting change. In the next chapter, we'll continue with the exploration of how being unaware of our attachments can cause suffering in our lives, especially when dealing with others. Boom. Alright, that rounds off chapter 12. The next chapter is chapter 13, recognizing the role of attachments in conflict. I'm ironing out the kinks. Bear with me. I know I'm stumbling over some words, fumbling through here, but I appreciate your patience because this is some of the sauce. I love this, these ideas. Toltec philosophy is beautiful and it brings my heart joy. So I want to share these ideas with other people, specifically you, Kelsey. If you hear this, I love you, and I cannot wait to talk about these ideas with you further. All right, see you guys soon. Bye.